Archives of Prasar Bharati presents the timeless treasure of golden era.
Hello and welcome to Question Forum. This week we deal with a serious subject. At the end of the month, Prime Minister Narasimha Rao flies to Russia. His is the first visit by any Indian Prime Minister to Moscow since VP Singh visited in 1990. Of course, as we all know, a lot has happened between 1990 and 1994. There's a new regime, there's probably even a new country. India traditionally has invested a lot in Moscow, in the Soviet Union, in its leaders, in the ideology they used to follow. We hope now that something can be salvaged from those relationships. We hope that we can go on as though nothing has ever gone wrong. But are these valid hopes? Are we being too optimistic? And what should the Prime Minister be considering when he goes there? To answer that question, we have on our panel the usual four wise men. Starting with, on my extreme right, a very distinguished wise man indeed. It used to be said of the Indian Foreign Service, when it was composed of the brightest and the best, that it was 1/3 protocol, 1/3 alcohol, and 1/3 tea and coal. Obviously, I am delighted to have tea and coal himself on the program. Probably the greatest diplomat that India has ever produced. He has been ambassador to Moscow, ambassador to Washington, and foreign secretary in his time. He has interacted closely with Khrushchev, with Kosygin, with Brezhnev, with Gorbachev, and Yeltsin. Manubhai Shah also has an old Russian connection. He was Commerce Minister from 1956 to 1959 at the center, and he started the rupee trade with India. Kandla, the free port in Gujarat, was his brainchild, and he is currently president of the Indo-Russian Chamber of Commerce. Among his many achievements is the fact that he has visited Russia 22 times. It's always a pleasure to have a colleague on the show. Keval Verma is much more than just an economic journalist. Currently resident editor of The Telegraph, he is a former card-carrying member of the CPI who has examined various other models of development before evolving his own distinctive views on India and the global economy. Vice Admiral K.K. Nair is the Russian speaker from the Indian Navy. As a captain, he was in Russia from 1969 to 1970. Later, he went on to command both the Eastern and the Western fleets before retiring as Vice Chief of Staff in 1986. He has spent the last few years in lecture tours in America, Japan, and Europe. We're going to start straight away with a question from Professor Zafar Iman, who is Professor of CIS Studies, I think you now call it, at Jawaharlal Nehru University. Professor.
Mr. Singhvi, with your permission, may I begin by saying, rather drawing the attention of the panelists, that the Soviet Union is no more for last 3 years about. We had very good relations and we have very happy memories of that country. Let that country lie in peace. But we must look ahead. We are facing a Russia, a new Russia, which, to say it mildly, is very hostile to us. Not only to us, but to the entire countries of the third world. So may I draw the attention of the panelists, how are we going to deal with this new Russia in a hostile environment in which the Russian people find today vis-a-vis India and other third world countries? Thank you.
Let me turn that to Mr. Keval Verma. Keval Saab, the suggestion is that all those years of goodwill in the old Soviet Union may well have come to naught because you're dealing with a very new Russia, and these new Russian people are not necessarily the Hindi, Rusi, Bhai types. First of all, do you accept that proposition, and how do we cope with it?
Well, the things have changed, undergone a big change, and but we have to look ahead, and look ahead at that Russia is potentially a big country. Today it may be passing through a difficult phase, but we have to look ahead, and India is also a big country, and I don't accept this proposition that we have the relationship between the two countries, adversarial relationship. Geography is there, we don't have a common border, but they are not very far off.
But do you believe they're hostile to us, as the professor suggests?
No, I don't accept they are hostile to us,
You don't accept that?
They need us as much as we need them.
All right, let me ask Mr. Cole. Mr. Cole, the suggestion there is that the new Russia is not really as well disposed towards us as the old Soviet Union. Do you accept that?
I certainly do not accept temporary changes having any long-term permanent effects. The Soviet Union may be dead, but it has taken the shape of the CIS. The land is there, the people are there, the Russians, the Kazakhs, the Uzbeks and others. We have to deal with them. We can revive the old relationship, but not in a repetitious way.
Is there anybody there who doesn't agree with Mr. Verma and Mr. Kohl?
My reaction to all this discussion is that we may not have adversarial kind of relationship, but we don't have that mutuality of interest either now. After the emergence of a unipolar world, it may be a transitory period, but even in that transition, the mutuality of interest of Russia and India perhaps is missing.
Can I ask anybody else from the audience who would like to comment on this? The proposition is this: even if they're not hostile, the old relationship was based on a certain mutuality of concerns. That mutuality has now disappeared. On what basis can you have a new relationship? Does anybody want to comment on that?
The relationship that moved away from India after the breakup of the Soviet Union is bound to swing back in India's favor. The reason being that today Russia realizes that the Western world cannot give it everything that was promised to them. India's path of following the middle route has proved to be a success in India and will ultimately prove to be the path that Russia will have to take. And I feel that they are veering around to this philosophy, that they will use India model to ultimately gain the objective that they want to of the market economy.
Let me go back to the professor, because it was his question that started it all. Professor, we've now had many responses. Are you satisfied with them?
No. What I was just trying to emphasize, that the objective situation have changed. Of course, on the other hand, the countries remain, the big ones. Russia is there with all its resources and grandeur, past, present, and perhaps future. And we have India equally. So obviously these countries have to interact. My point was, it is a different situation and a different objective reality. And it should be the task of Indian diplomacy to use this new reality to our disadvantage, against the background of the reality that Russia is no more as friendly as it was, or as somebody said rightly, in the absence of mutuality of interest between the two countries. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to take this now to the Vice Admiral. You've been lecturing extensively on the New World Order. How do you respond to all this?
In strategic terms, the mutuality of interest has not diminished but actually enhanced. What happened was that the Russians reappraised their position, and in that tentative period we thought that maybe they are drawing away from us. But I think their reappraisal has shown that the commonality of strategic interest which was there, the shared strategic perspective of the two countries, is very much the same as it was in the old days.
Well, that's a very different view from what we've heard so far. General Kohl, do you want to comment on that?
I do not agree at all with the statement made on my right that the mutuality of interest has gone. In fact, nor do I agree that there's a unipolar world. It did appear, particularly after the Gulf War, that the world was now a unipolar world. I think it was a mirage. Though America has got the military strength, economically they don't have the strength which they had in the post-1945 world. Secondly, having the military strength itself is not enough to be a unipolar power, or just the one pole. You must have the will to use that military power wherever it is required to be done. And I would put it to you that America is in no position to use that military power all over the world as the strong man on its own. Now, coming back to the mutuality of interest, I agree entirely with the Vice Admiral that in the new world order or world disorder, whatever you may like to call it, it is essential for major power centers, it will in fact come up, like Russia, China, India, Japan, the European community, and so on. And to have a peaceful world, the mutuality of interests of these very countries is really the balancing factor. And particularly to go on to the old relations, not in the same manner, but in the mutuality of interest and taking the new factors into account. I think there is no alternative for Russia and India but to come closer.
That leads directly, in fact, to a question from a reader. This is from Professor C.M. Kalita in Mahigaon in Guwahati. And the professor's question is as follows. It says, we keep talking about using Russia as a balance for America. But in that case, why didn't the Russians agree to supply the technology for cryogenic engines, though they had promised to do so earlier? How can there be any kind of balance against America if they just do what the Americans tell them? Mr. Kaul?
Well, I think we are apt to take a very short-term view of the changed situation in the former Soviet Union and Russia in particular. I think it's a period of transition. They'll take a little time to settle down, but the basic commonality of interest still exists. It is in the economic field, in the defense field, in the strategic field, in the cultural field, in the people-to-people communication.
The gentleman in the first row, next General Kaul. A quick question on trade, which Manubhai can answer.
You know, trade is the torchbearer for any relations. And India's relations with the ex-Soviet Union on the trade front has been nearly to the extent of 10,000 crores. But if we go in the deep interior, in cities and villages, we find there's a great response to Indian goods.
The deep interior of Russia?
Yes. People talk of Indian chai. People talk of Indian consumer goods. People talk of Raj Kapoor, and they call Mera Juta Japani and Avarao. One can hear in the streets. Now, we can draw a great strength out of it. A new class is emerging there, and which is nearly about 500,000 to 1 million people who are becoming a small-scale entrepreneurs. And there where India can lend its strength, because India has emerged from a small-scale entrepreneurship.
So what you're saying is that in the death of communism, there has emerged an intermediate capitalist class, and that class is likely to be sympathetic to our interests?
Surely.
Right. Manubhai, would you accept that?
At no period of time, I've met all the top men in Russia, they have ever spoken against or even lukewarmly about India. Always warm.
That's very encouraging, Manubhai. Let me ask the Admiral. You've lived in Russia as well. Did you find the same warmth? Do you see the same potential that he does?
I am fully in agreement with Minister Manubhai Shah. I think the amount of goodwill which the average Russian citizen has for India is unmatched in any country of a significant size which I know of. And having invested in creating that relationship, we must build on that. As far as the relationship in trade and strategic relationships, armament, etc. is concerned, I reckon that we built these relations when the whole world was suspicious of our relationship. Now that that disadvantage is gone, it will be a folly on our part not to preserve and enhance the big advantage which we have in relationship with this country, which we must remember would always be one of the most important military, trade or cultural entities in the world.
Admiral, there's a slight chicken and an egg situation here, isn't there? Where because we've bought their weapon systems, we're now dependent on them for spares. Because we're dependent on them for spares, we've got to be friends with them. Do you think in retrospect it was a mistake to be so dependent on them for spares?
I would not say that we have a situation in which we are dependent that we cannot run the weapon systems which we possess from them. There was a temporary setback. But India has a large industrial base, and we have managed to keep the weapon systems functional for the 3 or 4 years where the spare supply dwindled because of the internal upheavals in the former Soviet Union. The supplies have resumed, and I don't think we have any reason to worry on maintaining these weapon systems for the rest of their normal life.
I think the breakup of Soviet Union was a blessing in disguise for us. You see, firstly,
I just see Mr. Kaul raising his eyebrows at
No,
that.
no, no.
So I'm going to come in later. Tell us why.
I'm trying to provoke him.
I know, but he's
You see, it was a
cool
blessing
today.
in disguise in the sense that earlier relationship, we could not develop our relation direct with the consumer. They were all state organizations were there, trading organizations. We didn't know who were our consumers of goods, Now it has opened up opportunity. We can establish contact with straight with the consumers,
We must be more self-reliant on the production of spares with their cooperation to the extent necessary. But we must try to be more self-reliant, particularly in defense matters, and I'd say in all matters. So far as blessing in disguise is concerned, well, that's a phrase. It could be a blessing, it could not be a blessing. It certainly has.
And we have to accept it.
It has brought about greater opportunities and necessity for competition, for producing quality goods. And what I would like to emphasize is there's too much that syndrome of Sarkar, Mai Baap, old syndrome of the British days. I think the traders themselves should go in larger numbers to the Soviet Union and find new avenues for themselves, not depend only on the government. On the contrary, they should persuade, pressurize, influence the government to change their restrictive policies so that trade can develop on a free basis to the advantage of India and the other side also.
Tell us very quickly why you think it's a bad thing for India the Soviet Union broke up.
Basically, as Mr. Kaul have said, that now the Indian exporter community should flock and export. But we have to see at what cost. Today, if the exporting community from India is exporting, there's nobody or very scarcity of the people or banks in Russia who can open letters of credit as payment. So the only option for the exporting community is to stock and sell. They have no system for ensuring the security of the goods there, getting paid back, and even banks don't discount the documents. ECGC does not give a cover, and there is a lot of accumulation of goods. And
Are you saying therefore that you were happier with the old system with Big Brother than you are now?
No,
this
in terms of the exporting community, it was a much better organized system.
Right, okay,
but we have this system we have to improve, and this forum I would like to initiate the discussion that at government level, at chambers of commerce level, steps should be taken to take full advantage or exploit the new system.
You had something to say, sir.
I would like to take exception to what has been said. You cannot say it's a blessing in disguise or not. It has happened. And what has happened is that economic ideology has taken over. If defense spares are required, we have to go to those factories. Our Prime Minister going there and signing a pact with Rus-Borjuni, the new organization which many people were lulled into complacency, would supply everything, including tires and batteries, which are required. Even the businessman who just spoke, I presume now he's got to live in the jungle. So with due respects to our Commerce Minister of the time, we may have gone up a great lot in figures in business, but it is true trade and economic action which is taking place. In the long term, it is best for Soviet Union and us to be economic and strategic partners on straightforward terms. I would put it to Mr. Kaul that the emotional aspects he spoke of will have to be shed, and these practical and strategic partnerships of economy will have to be forged all over again by new diplomats.
No, but there has been a suggestion, I think, from Mr. Kaul, from Mr. Verma, and from various people in the audience that this great Indo-Soviet trade bubble has been built on let me finish what I'm saying. Built on a Mai Baap kind of arrangement whereby shoddy goods were sold. That now, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, you're entering something of a market system. You're getting quality goods going across, and perhaps this is the basis for a more durable relationship. Would you accept that?
I totally deny that the rupee trade was a shoddy trade. The Indian goods, some people always 1-5% can go. In all countries it happens. And even today, the supply of Indian goods is of high quality. The Russians have now developed a habit of buying the best quality. And it was never based on Mai Baap. I don't know how do you get that conception. It was purely on mutuality of interest and equality of opportunity on both sides.
You're itching to come in.
Well, the basic difference, earlier the Soviet bureaucrat used to decide what is good for the Soviet consumer or not. Today, Soviet consumer is deciding what is good for them or not. So that changes the whole scenario. So he's become more quality conscious, and I would not say that, I would not go into this thing. In trade it happens, if a Soviet bureaucrat is bribed, he would accept anything, And we are coming out to how much bribery was there in that earlier system. So far Soviet projects are concerned, it was not an unmixed bag. There were mixed things, there were good things, there were bad things.
Everybody is for trade, and Manu Bhai just talked of rupee-ruble arrangement. The question that this forum could debate is whether we should go back to rupee-ruble arrangement, number one. Number two, whether we could have barter trade. Russians have had barter trade with China, but they have shied away from India. Can we have barter trade?
I think the break of this Soviet Union has helped both the citizens of Russia and India too. Right. Because the citizens living there, politically they are no more mature. No, they are quality conscious. They are just, they want more and more things there. So India can play a crucial role in the consumer goods, particularly in that. And when Prime Minister is moving there, if some economic agreements are signed, and our traders and manufacturers, if they get chance to send their consumer goods there, we can definitely compete with the other countries.
Let me ask a question that's come from a reader. It's from a viewer. It's from Mrs. P.C. Sharma at the ONGC colony in Dehradun. She says, a lot has happened in the Soviet Union since it began to break up. What is the current status of the Indo-Soviet Treaty of Friendship? Are we friends with any of the Soviet states, or are we friends without any kind of treaty being required? Keval sir?
Well, that Indo-Soviet treaty has become redundant now after the collapse of Soviet Union. And we also have to recognize that those type of treaties were valid in a particular situation of Cold War. And we are facing a particular situation at that time. Now we should be looking ahead of working for a world where we do not need such treaties, And that treaty has an element of coming to mutual help and all that. We should not require.
Questions on unrelated subjects of trade? Is this a trade question?
Will Russia help us in becoming the member of the Security Council?
It is quite clear that the Americans are interested in pushing Japan and Germany. Should they seriously push it, the Russians, who have a very fine sense of strategic balance, I think would definitely help India.
So yes, do you think they will?
I would say
Mr.
yes.
Kaul, will they help us?
Well, I am not dependent on Russia's, America's or anybody else's help. But facts as they are indicate that Russia has favored the India becoming a permanent member of the Security Council. But whether we do become a permanent member or not, we should not depend on the Security Council to solve our problems. We must depend on ourselves, set our house in order, and make it clear to the rest of the world, as China is doing, that we will tolerate no interference in our internal affairs, no matter from where it comes.
Any other questions on the Prime Minister's trip to Russia? The gentleman in the second row.
Recently, Pakistan, much to our annoyance, put up to the UN General Assembly for a nuclear-free South Asia zone, which we did not want to be supported. And we were shocked when, much against our wishes, Russia supported Pakistan. I would ask the gentleman of the forum as to, can we depend on Russia or anything? We should not depend on
Very good point.
Keval sir, can we depend on Russia, given this background?
So far nuclear issue is concerned, not now, even when they were communist Soviet Union, their Soviet Union and American were convergence on the question of NPT. Their attitude was not very different at that time. So Soviet Union, whether it was Gorbachev, whether it was Khrushchev, Brezhnev, all wanted India to sign NPT. They were one, Soviet Union and America was one on this issue.
So you think there is no shift in
There is no shift on that count.
I'd say
Would you agree with that, Mr. Kaul? Because
there is a slight shift, but we need not be bothered about it. As I said, if we adopt a firm attitude as China has done.
We must remember that technologically we had been very much dependent upon the former Soviet Union, because any other country in the Western world was not ready to give us any technology. So now the question before the panelist is, under this garb of globalization, should we wait for the Western countries to give us the charity, or should with the Russians and other CIS countries?
I'm going to rephrase your question slightly, because there has been implicit in what many people have said today, a suggestion that because we had no choice, we became dependent on Russians for many things. One of them, I think the Vice Admiral has touched on that, is defense. I wonder, I see General Hirte Kaul in the audience, are we actually dependent on the Russians for weapon systems?
I want to point out that why we bought so many weapons from the Soviet system was because we got them damn sight cheaper than any other country. To give you an example, we bought 3 tanks from Russia for the price at that time of 1 tank from any other cheapest source in the world. It was not because of our political affiliation with the Soviet Union. Secondly, so far as getting the technology for them is concerned, now I'm telling you this from personal experience because I was involved myself. When we bought the T-72 tanks, for instance, which is no secret, the Russians insisted that we make our own factories and manufacture it in India, which we did. And even today, the spares, we still are not dependent because all these spares are available in the world market.
Well, what conclusions have emerged? Well, one I think is staggeringly obvious. There is virtually no nostalgia for the old Soviet Union. Most people here seem to think that its demise was a matter of great joy. If not a matter of joy, certainly not a matter of any regret. Instead, there's a lot of optimism about the new Russia. There's a sense in which people feel that India and Russia can now have an equal relationship, that the relationship can be based on respect for peoples, and it can be based, more importantly, on trade. I think that's an optimistic sign. It augurs well for Narasimha Rao's trip to Moscow, and it augurs well for India-Russia relations. We're going to be back next week when we are going to talk about the consumer society and the pitfalls it poses to India. You've been watching Question Forum. I'm Veer Sanghvi. Goodbye.